Now, our daily bread, that's the front cover of my first book, and of course that was published, 2004, and of course even a lot has changed since then. And the Ormo van on the front cover, of course, electric vehicles for years were all the rage, if you like, and of course now they have virtually completely disappeared. There are, I think, we believe on this island, 3 electric vehicles still running on the road, and they are in Lisburn. They are 3 electric milk floats belonging to Drains Farm Dairies. But they're making a comeback, and of course they were introduced to Ireland in 1933. The first ones appeared. Ormo had quite a big stable of them. Co-op in Belfast had about 100 and odd milk floats. A friend of mine in Ballymena, who worked for Ford before he retired, his claim to fame was that he designed the first Ford Fiesta, and of course that's today quite a claim. He then his father was the man who brought these vehicles in. He is hoping to publish a book about the electric vehicles. But let's come back to Ormo. Now, Ormo Bakery, the word Ormo, I presume you all know it is French, but do you know what it means? That's the burning question. We'll come back to that. The name ORMO is the brand name, and of course brand names are very sort of, well, I wouldn't say secretive, but people like to hold on to them over the years. And that brand name Ormo was introduced in 1931. Now, of course, the word bread is very important. We all eat bread every day, some shape or form. And I am not a Bible student, but I have a friend who is a Bible student, and he found out for me that the word bread is mentioned in the Bible 238 times. That's how important bread is, or was, and of course still is. And the word loaf or loaves is mentioned, I think it's 29 times, but we'll come back to that. And of course, always remember my father. I am 3rd generation of a family in the bakery business. And I always remember my father quoting that the bakery business was the 2nd oldest profession. And if you look at your Bible, Genesis chapter 3, you will see that the older profession does get a mention just a few verses before the baker. I had a lady phone me one evening when I was at home, and she said, I understand you do a talk about the oldest profession. I said, no madam, I do not. But this is the thing that happened. But that's bread, and now let's go on sort of in the thing about bread. The next picture I would be looking for would be a bread cart to show how bread was delivered, and that is a very old picture. It's a picture taken, I think it's 1919, to show a bread cart with the back doors open and the bread server and the lady customer. That should be the next picture. Then there was the fact that all the bread in that time was not sliced or wrapped. And of course then the next picture after that would be to show about packaging. And when you look at all the products today, everything of course has to be packaged, because when you go into a supermarket and everybody lifts a loaf and squeezes it and fiddles with that, because there is a Vita and all the other traditional breads that we have in Northern Ireland, there is not the range anywhere else in the UK. We have so many products like soda farls, Vita, Baps, potato bread. All of these are all peculiar to Northern Ireland. And of course, this, one of the reasons why I like this image of the bag, and of course the name Sunblessed, traditional malt loaf. I'm afraid they've lost a bit of the tradition. When you look at the list of ingredients there, that you have there, they are not showing, they say wheat flour, malted wheat flour. There, when I looked in Glasgow at the original patented recipe for Vita, the Vita flour should be 30%. You're lucky if you get 10%, and you will know, I'm sure you will know, Eleanor, when you cut a Vita loaf, if it's not very sticky these days. And of course that's why they have cut it. But I like that Vita loaf. I find that quite a nice loaf. Now, oh, sorry, back. We missed Barney now. I've lost Barney again here. Yeah, that's it. Barney Hughes, the reason I took this, Barney Hughes, the dominant baker in his time, the reason I show this image, it should read "No business like dough business," but I took it out of the Belfast newsletter. It was written by Trevor Parkhill, and the reason I wanted, or one of the reasons, was the fact that it had a nice little potted history of Barney, and it also had the street rhyme about Barney Hughes. Barney Hughes's bread sticks to your belly like lead, not a bit of wonder. And of course everybody, I had published, Trevor Parkhill had written that. Barney Hughes, now Barney Hughes was a Catholic man who came in from Armagh, virtually penniless, and he got a job in a bakery in Donegal Street, next door almost to St Anne's Cathedral. He was very successful over the years and got on very well, and eventually, to cut the story a bit, he became the owner of the public bakery, and he was doing very well, and he even did better when he met his best friend eventually, a man called the Reverend Dr. Henry Cook. Now, if you're a Presbyterian, you will know that Henry Cook was the great Presbyterian man in those days. And to the extent that Henry Cook married Barney Hughes and his Presbyterian wife in May Street Presbyterian Church, it was one of the first weddings in that church, I think about 1829. And of course, his wife Jane, she was Presbyterian. She had 3 sons, and those 3 sons eventually got to develop the Barney Hughes empire that we knew up until the 1970s. The other redeeming feature of that relationship with Barney and Henry Cook, Barney Hughes was, or Bernard Hughes to give him his full title, was the first Catholic to be elected to Belfast City Council. And it caused quite a stir. But even the Catholic Bishop Dorian in Belfast, in the book about Barney, we found the quote. This is the book written by Jack McGee, who had worked Barney Hughes, a very, very good biography. The Catholic Bishop Dorian, didn't like the relationship between Barney Hughes and Henry Cook, and he said that the Catholics in Belfast were becoming too Presbyterianised. But the one good thing Bishop Dorian did, he did 2 things to make his claim to fame. He founded the Mater Hospital. But the other thing that he did, City Cemetery in Belfast, as we know today on the Falls Road, 100 acres of land, 250,000 graves. That was originally a Protestant cemetery, and you will know that Tom Hartley, former mayor of this city, has published a book about it, and of course he will tell you in the book that the Bishop Dorian, didn't like the Protestants being buried next to the Catholics when it was open to Catholic burials. So he decided we will build a wall between the Protestants and the Catholics. But he built the wall 9 feet down, and you can actually if you go to the city cemetery and you say, my grandfather is buried such they were in the office, they will give you an A4 sheet with a middle map and tell you where to find the grave. And on that book there's a little dotted red line, tells you where the wall is. And Tom had some photographs of that wall. When they were digging a fresh grave, they found this wall 9 foot down, still there today. But Barney, we move on. Barney was quite a character, and of course, unfortunately, Henry Cook died in 1868. That's, in the bakery industry, to me, is quite a relevant date. But Henry Cook died 1868. Barney felt so distraught, lost his best friend, and he decided that there should be a statue erected. And he gathered up a lot of the money, and a lot of the money was Catholic money. And he even went to London and had that statue cast in London, fetched back to Belfast and put up there. And of course you will see that the front of that building there is etched. And of course those houses over in College Square North, Barney eventually lived there, and there is a blue plaque on the front of one of those houses. Now, that picture would be about, I think, the late possibly 90s. And you see all the loose stones there. That is, there is a feature missing in that picture. A very popular feature in Belfast. Anybody know what it is?
Technical.
Yes, that's the foundation stones. Now, whether my sequence will... No, it doesn't. Not to worry. The Tech, of course, was opened in 1906, the same time as the City Hall. This is Barney Hughes's mill. That is the corner of Guildford Street at the bottom of the Falls Road, long gone. And when that mill was opened, I think it was quoted...
Correction.
Pardon?
That's Divis Street.
Yeah, Divis Street, yeah.
Divis Street.
It was supposed to be the tallest building in Ireland when it was opened. You can see the lorry at the back there with the flour bags. It's interesting that Barney Hughes had used the Farset River to drive his mill some years earlier, and once he installed machinery, and of course with the chimney there, he didn't need the water. Oh, sorry, I'm running away here. Oh, we've gone the wrong way. I beg your pardon. Instead of going, it's going backwards here. Ah, that's it. Now, oh, wait a minute. No, we're all out of sync here, but not to worry. We'll just have to cope with this. Let me try. Go back. Ah, we're okay now. This is the blue plaque. Now, one of the reasons why we got the blue plaque installed there, Barney Hughes was reckoned to be a great philanthropist. He was a generous man, and he owned the land further up the Farset River, the land which is now the home of St. Peter's Cathedral, Catholic Cathedral. He gave that land to the Catholic Church to build the cathedral. And of course it's open tomorrow for the Heritage Weekend, and there's a very interesting connection that I will come to later. But in that church there are 3 lovely stained glass windows to the Hughes family. And of course, if we go on here, and hopefully we'll find it, yes. Now, this is an 1850 map held in Royal Avenue Library, and you will see Donegal Place, and the street in the middle there intersecting is Fountain Lane, and at the bottom end there it says the Railway Bakery. Barney Hughes lived there in the Railway Bakery, and the reason it was called the Railway Bakery, it was a shop, but the bakery was up round behind near the mill. And the reason it became the Railway Bakery, the streets were so bad, he put down little tracks to wheel his bread carts down to the bakery, and that's how it became known, the Railway Bakery. And of course, unfortunately, living over the shop, there are records of Barney's house being stoned many times when there were troubles in Belfast, and there Jack had found that they were giving bread away 1850s after the famine in Belfast. Now let's move, hopefully, oh now, yes, we're in a sequence now. Bottom right hand corner, I have collected, that's the Ormo Bakery Bread Servers badge. The top left 2 are tokens for the Windsor Bakery. I still haven't found out what they are for, but the top right hand corner was a minted token which Barney Hughes had. When he was living in Donegal Place, he would go out on the street, people would beg money, but he wouldn't give them money. He reckoned that if he gave them money, they would go to the local shebeen and drink it. So he had these tokens minted. The top big one was he would give that to a woman with children, and she would get a loaf. The other 2 diagonally opposed there, that was a smaller one, about the size of our 1p coin, and that would have got them a bap. And this is what made Barney Hughes' baps so famous. And of course, this is why he was regarded as such a philanthropist. Now, the other big player, of course, at that time, some years later, was James Inglis. Now, if you're Scottish, you would pronounce this Ingles, but the Inglis family came from Dunfermline, Toon in Scotland, to Dublin originally in the mid-1800s, and they established quite a big family connection in Dublin. One of them, when Queen Victoria did her last visit to Dublin, one of these men was presented to the Queen. The mayor of Dublin at that time was a Sinn Féin man, and he would not accept Queen Victoria. James Inglis was he was offered, and he met Victoria, and he was offered a baronetcy. And he was living in a house at his house was called Donnybrook, which is now the headquarters of RTE. Now, if you look at that picture, just about halfway up on the left-hand side, I'm afraid my laser pointer has expired on the... It has, yeah, it's given up the ghost. There is a little train, you can see a little train there with smoke. English built that bakery in Eliza Street with the view to shipping their bread all over the country. And of course, it was quite successful. There were 2 brothers actually, James and Frederick Inglis. They had originally bought the Central Cafe in Castle Street before they opened up that bakery. Now, that was how they intended to move their bread throughout the province. All the bakeries did that. Barney Hughes, McCombs there, Stevenson's of Londonderry, they all shipped bread out to depots like Armagh, Portadown. The bread server came in, took his bread out and then delivered it to the local people. Now, this is later years, English had taken over many bakeries in Belfast. My list of bakeries has disappeared here, but we'll come back. This was originally the Bloomfield Bakery at the Hollywood Arches. English had bought that in I think it was 32. I should remember that because that was the year I was born, but nevertheless. They knocked it all, the old original Bloomfield Bakery down and built the biscuit factory and opened that, as they say, in 1937. The man who was running that was a man called Tom Piggott. Piggott family were very well known in business, and he had 4 sons and 1 daughter. And one of his sons, since dead, was Jim Piggott, well-known surgeon in the Royal. And his other 2 sons, other 3 sons, they were in London in 1953, January 1953, at a packaging exhibition. It was a terrible wet Friday night, storms, 31st of January. They were due to fly home, but they couldn't. Flight was cancelled. They were given tickets on the Stranraer-Larne ferry. That was fatal. They were both drowned on the Princess Victoria. That didn't quite, the father found difficulty coping, and he did die about 4 years later. And then, of course, the whole thing all changed. The rank Hovis moved in. Now, I'll show you this, well, we'll just quickly go this. This should have been one of the early pictures to show, this is a normal bakery picture to show how a kitchen and how your bread was cooked. This is a normal bakery picture based on the Mellon homestead in the Folk Park at Omagh. And of course the typical Ulster hearth with kitchen crane, the griddle, the kettle. And do you know what is sitting to the left of the kettle? Anybody know what that's called? A harning stand. There's a great collection in the museum in Armagh, and it's for warming your oatcakes. And of course, up to the left, that was the salt box to keep your salt dry. But let's go on and see if we can find English. This, of course, just jumped out. This is the little boy, the original Hovis advertising. Everybody has used this. Even the 2 Ronnies have used this recently to portray. This is the famous hill in Shaftesbury in England. Up those cobbles was not an easy task, but let's press on. The whole English thing changed. I said to you, RHM moved in 1959, Rank Hovis MacDougall. And they came in and they bought the whole English group, which consisted of about 20 odd bakeries. They had bought City Bakery, McWaters, Willis's in Newry, Davidson's in Portadown, McWaters. They had bought all those bakeries. And of course, RHM, what they had to offer was stunning. And one of the things that I hope to show you today is how that the bakery trade has changed so completely from the horse and cart image to what you see on your supermarket shelf. And it will affect every person in this room, I know. RHM owned the flour milling, the film business. They owned Mecca ballrooms and bingo halls. They owned Hovis, of course. They owned the name Granary. They owned Nimble. They owned Mother's Pride, Mr. Kipling, Bisto, Sarah Boss Salt. You will forgive me trying to remember all these. The easiest way is just to write them on a postcard. Angel Delight, Sharwood's sauces and spices. They even bought over recently the Lloyd Grossman sauces business. They owned Smash, the mashed potato biscuits, potatoes, Lion's Cakes, and Marvel, which was dried milk. That's not a bad little stable to have. But then along came, in about 2006, I think it was, Premier Foods. Now, I'm sure there might be only, I know there is one gentleman sitting in the back who knows of Premier Foods. They appeared in the scene and they took over RHM, and they had in their package Campbell's soups, which are, I believe, coming back on the market. They also had Bachelor's soups, which were the condensed soups. They own Branston pickles, sauces, Hartley's jams and marmalade, Oxo spices, Bird's custard and desserts, Frey Bentos meats products, Home Pride flours and sauces, Ambrosia, which I have a little tub here, which a friend of mine at the back knows well, Cross and Blackwell's pickles, Sunpat peanut butter, Paxo stuffing, Atora suet, Rose's lime juice and marmalades. That's a little shopping basket today. And they also own, but they have since sold it off. I saw it on television last night. Quorn meat substitute products, advertised by Mo Farah, the man that does the running. He advertised, but they sold that off. Now, we'll turn over the card later. So, Premier Foods, that is the sign down on the Boucher Road today, where the bakery is. That bakery was opened in 1967 by Lord Rank. Now, we're sort of in a way moving backwards here. Ormo Bakery. These are two pictures that were given to me when the bakery was being converted. Let's look at this. The word Ormo is the French word for a young elm tree. That's where it gets its name. Now, if you're interested, there's a lovely book, I think it's out of print, called Living Like a Lord. It's written by a man called Bill McGuire. He was a charming man, he was a school teacher, and then worked in the museum at Stranmillis, also worked a while at Cartraw. Lovely book about the second Marquess of Donegal. Now, he was a tremendous gambler and womanizer, and he got the nickname, and Bill quotes him in here, as the Marquess of Donegal. And of course, he lived in the Ormo domain, which we now know as the Ormo Park. There is a drawing in the book of the original Ormo house, and of course, there is an elm tree hanging over the wall there today. That was the Ormo Bakery. The part there, apart from the little white pillars, the original part was opened in 1890 by Robert Wilson, and he was one of three brothers. Now, his eldest brother, I'll backtrack here. His eldest brother, this is an interesting brass plate, very solid brass plate. It was on the wall, and the address, very conveniently, is on this brass plate. 1 and 3 Cromwell Street, 51 May Street. Now, if you know, you can take a photograph of that later if you want. John A. Wilson. 3 brothers came into Belfast. John A. Wilson had his bakery at the corner of May Street, where Telephone House is now. He died, now this is where I said to you earlier, the same year Henry Cook died, 1868. He was drowned in a boating accident in Belfast Lough with about 3 other bakers, strangely enough. They were rowing across Belfast Lough and run down by a schooner, 1868. So we know that this brass plate, and it was engraved by W.H. Lynn of Lynn and Lanyon. Nice brass, regional brass plate. I have been to Telephone House, set it on the wall, taken a picture of it where it probably was in situ. Now, he was in the business in May Street for up until his death, obviously 68. There was another partnership then took it on. Strange enough, Wilson and Strain. But that Wilson was no relation to these 3 brothers. They managed for a while, and then they packed in, and they were then taken over by a family called Macmillan, some of whom are still alive today. Ernest Macmillan, who was he lives in Cumber, he is now in his 90s, and they took it over and closed it down for a short while, and they then had the bakery, as I said, Bloomfield Bakery. But the interesting point, funny enough, with television on last Monday night, the man who moved into those premises, May Street, Crumwick Street, they have a picture and it says the Crumwick Steam Bakery, and there's a board on the wall and all the men are sitting there, and because it was a hot steam bakery, some of the men are in their bare feet. But the next picture is 1910, and the name on the board has changed to Harry Ferguson. And the picture again taken in the loft of the flour loft of the bakery is Harry Ferguson building his aeroplane, which we had last Monday night, and we will have more of next Monday night, but that's how it evolved. I have those photographs. So right, let's go on now. Ormo Bakery. The Ormo Bakery, that's when it is as it is now. That's a CGI, computer generated image. You can see the little man in the red car still stuck in Park Road. That's since it was developed into apartments. Those 4 penthouse apartments up on the roof are magnificent. They were sold at £500,000 each. When the apartment block was opened, I had an invitation, and when you stand up on the very top there and look down the Ormo Road, the view is stunning. And of course, most of the airplanes, when they take off at City, they literally go straight up the Ormo Road. When they get to Forest Side, they go their separate ways. But it's nice to see a building, instead of having it bulldozed, it is well used. And of course, the one good factor, all the cars are parked within the building. You operate your buzzer, the door opens, you drive in. It's I have a very nice, by the way, Stephen, your information here about the Ormo Bakery, say it has a roof garden. It has a courtyard garden, not a roof garden. Have a look at that. Now, these are the 2 principals of the Ormo Bakery before it closed. This was a visit by Lord and Lady West. The Ormo Bakery seemed to thrive on visits over the years, even back into the 1930s, by the various governors and dignitaries. And the tall man standing to the left, funny enough, talking of brass plates, I wonder where those 2 brass plates disappeared to, but that's another story. By the way, Stephen, you will probably be having this brass plate anyway. The man on the left is Elliot Wilson. He was a charming man. He lived up at Balnahinch direction. He was at this time he was Lord Lieutenant of Northern Ireland, and his last duty as Lord Lieutenant was in 1994, where he was with the Queen when they opened the new bridges over the Lagan, the railway bridge, the M3, and of course the railway bridge was known as the Dargan Bridge. The other man on the right talking to Lord West, Ian Wilson. Both these gentlemen, their families are still very much involved in life today. Ian Wilson's daughter, I knew both of these men very well. Ian Wilson's daughter, you will not know her, but her name now today, her married name is Beth Robinson of Templeton Robinson. That's his daughter. One of Elliot's daughters, is married to one of the Faulkners in County Down. And again, hopefully my Ormo book there's a great family tree going back to 1790. Now, this is the other part of the Ormo bakery that made them so unique. They opened a farm, not very well, you know where the farm is, Eleanor, Marilyn. And this is a drawing of one of their booklets. And of course, at that time, they had the biggest herd of privately owned herd of Jersey cattle. The idea was to produce milk and butter and cream for the bakery, 30,000 chickens laying eggs to make cakes. And the house in the background is called Cassock. The name is still on the gate. That gateway is on the road between Dromore and Lurgan. But the interesting point, that house in the background is still there today, built by McLaughlin and Harvey in, I think, about 1889. It's the original Cassock house, still lived in today for the Richardson family of Richardson and Owen. Now, this is one of the books that the Ormo Bakery did, and I show this because it was quite cheeky. They used various books, and they used one book which I thought was quite clever, with a series of old masters. But they slightly altered the picture to include an Ormo product. Now, this is the famous Gainsborough lady, but she was just sitting there. But they put this box of chocolates in her lap to give you the impression that she was eating Ormo Bakery handmade chocolates. There is another picture which I have of Lord Wakehurst standing in the bakery stuffing chocolates in his face. This now is a hog picture. Hog and Welsh at that time were very prevalent in taking all these pictures. And of course, interesting, this picture, not only is it dated, year, date, but also the time, 7:30 in the morning, before all the men all moved off, and of course, the elm trees in the background. 1937.
Is that the Ormo Road?
Pardon?
Is that the Ormo Road or the bakery?
Well, the Ormo Road where the tram lines are, that's Park Road, where the vans are. Now, the Ormo Bakery made, I show this because the wedding cake business has changed dramatically now. These were works of art made with royal icing, as distinct from sugar paste. Now it's all sugar paste, which came in to use. A firm called John F. Renshaw made sugar paste. I think it came in about the late 50s. And of course that's what they're all covered with now. And Ormo have a lovely book, which I have, of all their wedding cakes which they offer. Now, this is the other side of the card. And this is the man which has a tremendous influence on what we all eat today and how we all shop. Joseph Larry Stewart, 1911. He came from Crossgar, opened his shop, as you see, Bradyville Terrace, Bloomfield. Look at the price of tea 1 and 4, 1 and 6 a pound, 2 bob, sugar 3d a pound. I mean, that he was a great character, Joseph Larry Stewart. A lot of people, he was regarded as Black Joe Stewart. When I talked to women's groups, he employed tremendous female staff, and he had a wee bit of a reputation, but we'll come back to that. This was his opening. Now, to cut the story, he eventually opened in Northern Ireland 72 shops. Many of them were in Belfast. He had about 4 on the Woodstock Road. But he had 72 shops. I have a list of all the addresses. Now here we are. We're back to this should have been earlier. I'm sorry, I'll have to get this sorted. I'll just quickly go through this. This was a list of the bakeries in Belfast between and after the Second World War. Every one of these bakeries delivered originally by horse and cart, except 2. And every one then after the Second World War were still in business, but then the ones with the little ticks were absorbed by various companies. Now, I'll quickly through them. My family business was the Eglinton Bakery. It got its name from Eglinton Street off the old Lodge Road, and then it moved to Lisburn Road. Ormo, we have mentioned. Hughes, we have mentioned. Baines was a family, and they were in Montrose Street between Albert Bridge and Newtonards Road. Mercer, long gone. The Baines family are still around. Mercers aren't, Fitzroy aren't, Windsor, Patterson, they are gone. Royal, Stewart's there, some of them about, that was Ravenhill Road. Gibson's was down at the village off Tate's Avenue. Quick little story about Gibson's. In that little village area, a lot of people liked jobs after the Second World War. They wanted a job because it kept them warm, they get paid and they get fed. And a girl got a job, she lived around the corner. She didn't like the unsocial hours of having to go into work at sort of 7 o'clock in the morning, because she was a night bird. That was Ruby Murray. She didn't like working in the bakery. City Bakery was Ardley Street off the Crumlin Road. Snugville and the McCombs, that was, now this is what we were just interrupted there. Stewart, Sunblest, we'll get to that. Marsh, now this is I doubt if anybody has ever heard of Marsh, but we'll come back to that. Quaker business, the building is still there. Inglis and Company we have talked about. Co-op was the one that wasn't a family business. The Co-op Bakery, the building is still there in Ravenhill Avenue. It is now a block of apartments called Old Baker's Court. Warwick's Bakery was a friend of my father's in round by Sandy Row. Munn's again were they were on the Lisburn Road. I should say that the Windsor is now the Marks and Spencer shop on the Lisburn Road there at Marlborough Park. Kennedy's Bakery, J.B. Kennedy's Bread, you remember the TV advert. And then Parks, they're still about, the family. McWaters again, still about. Bloomfield, that was Macmillan, they're still about. O'Hara's, that was, and this is where we introduced another French name into the bakery business. O'Hara's were very much a Shankle Road family. They had a lot of shops in North and West Belfast. They didn't deliver because they had all the shops, but their bakery was in Camberaya Street as the Belfast pronunciation, or if you want to go French, Cambrai Street. And of course Granville was a family called Kelly in off the Newtonards Road. That Kelly family produced a man called Lord Chief Justice Kelly, Basil Kelly, QC MP. Now, White's Milk Bar, the reason I show that, White's Milk Bar, Fountain Lane, our generation would remember White's Milk Bar. You went in, you got a cup of frothy coffee, it cost you 6D. Now you get a cup of frothy coffee in Belfast, it costs you £2.50, and it's called cappuccino. But that's just a quick list. That was at Belfast. But consider that Belfast, there were as many bakeries in the rest of the province as there were in that list. Now, this is how the Stuart's image was portrayed. These pictures would have been in the 50s, 60s in Belfast, and of course the car dates it as well. 72 shops with that image, and this was this was the first time we saw the name Sunblessed on those roundels on the van, and Tip Top Bakeries. This actually should have been a coach, but it was converted into a big bread van. And of course you remember Weston's Biscuits. This was the man, Weston's opened a biscuit factory up at Castlereagh, and this is where they made the famous wagon wheels biscuits. And of course we press on with that. Now, after the Second World War, Garfield Weston, the man who came to Belfast, he was Canadian, he came to Belfast in 1935, and he bought all Stuart's shops, all 72 of them, in 1935. But because of the war in 39, he couldn't do anything about it. He had to, he came to live in England, he became an MP in Macclesfield, he was a great Churchill supporter, he had money to literally burn, shall I say. He gave, there's a lovely book called The Donegal Spitfire, he gave to Churchill he bought and gave to Churchill 8 Spitfires and 6 Hurricanes, and said to Churchill, you must win this war. But then things moved on, and they came back after the war. They started setting up Stuart's supermarkets, and of course by this time it was his son, Galen Weston, who is with us today. And of course this is the only image that's left in Belfast today. I took this photograph. But what does that letter E remind you of?
Euro.
Well done, madam. Smart girl. And that was long before we ever heard of euro. That was 1968. Treaty of Maastricht wasn't until 71, and then the euro came after that. So what were they thinking of? Anyway, this man Weston then really changed the whole setup. And when we look at his portfolio, I've gone too far. Mr. Weston, of course, the brand names, one on the table there, Sunblessed, Allinson, Kingsmill, Bergen, and of course Silver Spoon Sugar. They are actually bigger than Tate and Lyle today. All the sugar that they produce is beet sugar, all produced in a lovely big factory in Norfolk. Rye Vita, Jordan cereals, which maybe you had this morning with for your breakfast. Maybe tonight you'll go home and you'll have some Ovaltine. You maybe cook with Mazola corn oil. You maybe have some Patak's spices, Indian sauces, and you will maybe have, if you like, a stir-fry, Blue Dragon stir-fry sauces, prawn crackers, tremendous range of that. And of course then our subject for the next lecture is tea, Twining's tea, and the other tea from Belfast, which is not packed here anymore, but is still in the supermarket shelf, Nambarry. That is all covered by Associated British Foods, which you will see. And of course, that isn't the half of it. This is the other big part of the Western Empire, which is tremendous today. is Neil's Flour Mill round in College Square. And then in the south of Ireland they own Penny's. And in Dublin they own Brown Thomas's. In Dublin, Galway, Cork and Waterford. Those shops are booming. But the big one is Primark. They own Primark, and Primark has in the UK 250 plus stores and opening more. And they opened one recently in America, in Boston, because of the big Irish connection. They called it Penny's, and it is booming. But when you go to London, as we all try to do, they own Selfridges, they own Fortnum and Mason's, and they own Heels. Fortnum and Mason's, of course, is the big hamper business and is also known as the Queen's Grocers. Now when you look at that card, you could go into Sainsbury's, as I not do, and you could walk around and you could fill 3 trolleys easily in Sainsbury's with all of those products. Because when you look at some of them, like Mr. Kipling, they have about a dozen products. When you look at Ambrosia, they have about a dozen products. So you're not long filling, and this is why I say it has an influence on all of us, how we spend our money. So, now, this is an interesting one from the history point of view. Marsh and Company. Nobody ever heard of Marsh and Company? No, Eleanor, surprised. I thought I'd mention this. 2 Quaker brothers came to Belfast in mid-1800s. They started making ship's biscuits and bread. Then they built a factory in Donegal Street. Now, hopefully I will have that picture, but they were 2 Quaker brothers and they did very well. Yes, there we are. That's it, lovely. This is my own picture. Half of the factory at that end was bombed out in 1941. That is what we call, if you like, just about as you go up to Carlisle Circus. That site there is where we have had all the problems with bands on a Saturday afternoon coming down from Carlisle Circus opposite St. Patrick's Church. That building is 25 years older than the City Hall. I'm told it's one of the finest examples. It was built by McLaughlin and Harvey, and I know the man who produced the book, and the finest example of Annandale brick and red Scottish sandstone. But the whole point of this fact is it where the first cream crackers were ever made in Europe. Now don't put your hand up and say, oh no, they were made in Dublin. There is the history of W&R Jacob, and written by Seamus O'Matthew, who signed this book for me in 2003, and he says in the book that the first cream crackers were made in Belfast. And of course, Jacobs do not make any biscuits in Dublin and Ireland anymore. And of course, the equivalent of this establishment in Dublin, in Bishop Street, the National Archive, is the former Jacobs Biscuit Factory. I was down a couple of weeks ago doing some research just before it closed. It's closed for a couple of months for some refurbishment, but a very, very nice setup, similar to this. But that's one of Belfast's claim to fame. Not a lot of, oh, sorry. These are a few ones I've just thrown in as a matter of interest. Items I've picked up over the years. Look at that. Now, when did you last see a Paris bun? And there's Foster Clark. Now, Foster Clark, I contacted them and they couldn't even give me a date on that image. They hadn't got a copy of it. So I sent it off to them and they were to come back to me with the date on it. Could you imagine there's only a Paris bunch for one day? That's an original advert. Now, this is an interesting one in Killylea. I do know who the man was and who the young lady was, but there's an interesting connection here. You can't just read it, but on the original picture, you can see the man is holding onto the door, and just beside his hand, the word is S-N-U-G, half of the name Snugville Bakery. And how snug was that picture? Was it the young lady, the man, or the fact that she got her loaf? That's the other part of the story. But again, you get these now. Oh, sorry, going back. This is a lovely image. Now, this was given to me by a man on the Bakers Union in Belfast. I'm assuming you can read it yourselves. Lovely image. 1910. As a reward, they were taken to Carrickfergus to the salt mines, and they were given a meat tea. The cost of the afternoon was 1 shilling and 9d per head. And of course, lovely. I like the men wearing a flat cap as distinct from the baker's hat. Lovely image, which I have. Now, this is, you know Wesley Geddes? This is Wesley Geddes' homestead in County Down. Wesley gave me this picture, and this should have been at the beginning, but we'll have to sort that out. Bread servers delivered 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now, I'm conscious it's time. And they also delivered papers. This lady bred chickens, and she's reading the Poultry Gazette. And of course you can see all the bread, not sliced and wrapped, but we'll maybe have an image of that in a moment. No. This is another original one that I have. This is a very good picture. 1918, a visit by Lord Carson with his second wife, visiting the bakery school in Belfast. The reason why, in 1918, the bread that was baked in the bakery school in the Tech was supplied to the Somme Hospital. And Lord Carson came in to the bakery school to thank the staff for the bread. It was all bread and cakes. Now, there is a man there, and unfortunately, as I said, my pointer has died on me. I'm not having a good day. But this man up here, just there, that is J.B. Kennedy. And J.B. Kennedy and my grandfather both taught in the bakery school. And my grandfather is in the back of that picture. I can just make him out right bang in the middle. And on that occasion, that was J.B. Kennedy. And of course, the interesting point, J.B. Kennedy, the man who is in charge at St. Peter's Cathedral today, Hugh Kennedy, Father Hugh Kennedy, is grandson of J.B. Kennedy. How's that for coincidence? How do I get all these gems? This is a lovely one. This is, funny enough, this is Hugh Kennedy's picture. Now, look at the lovely wrapped bread. This was a van that Kennedy family have. And it's a lovely image. And there's the big deep drawers that were pulled out. And you can understand what I was saying earlier about bakers. The bread servers in the country made more money in the Second World War selling other goods other than bread. And they were dealing in chickens and eggs and potatoes and all sorts of things. And in one instance, I was told that somebody, when they pulled out that big, there were two little pigs standing in it. Somebody had said, "Would you like a little roast pig?" Now, again, we're using the last few. This is a lovely old image. Again, 1921, I'm told, because the RIC man standing there, I'm told, is holding a Martini Henry rifle. This was George Stewart of Royal Bakery. The in June, the ladies all in their fur coats and hats, all going off on a charabanc outing for the day. And if you look at the far right, typical, all the little boys in the bare feet run into the picture. Lovely image. Well, we do know George Stewart, the man standing right in the middle. His family are still about. Now, we're coming to the last couple. At this point in the talk, you would say, this is something I made earlier, like 50 years ago. Harvest Festival loaf. These were made for the Harvest Festival at this time of year, strangely enough. And this was the Harvest Festival, and it was all made, and of course you rolled out all the stalks, and you can see right in the middle the little mouse, as you had currants for the mouse's eyes, the bristles of a brush for his whiskers. And I'm told the stories, you see, in a small town, say like Killilea, the baker would have made one, and because it was loaded with a lot of salt to preserve it, it went into one church one Sunday, it was taken away, the next Sunday it would have gone into the other church, and we'd gone around the 4 churches in Killilea, the Methodist, the Church of Ireland, the Presbyterian, and the Catholic Church, and they would all have their share of the Harvest Festival. And then, of course, the next one, again, 50 years ago, with the biblical connection, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Not bad for a 50-year-old, but there we are. So really, we've been right through, dare I say, the middle, and we come to the end. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the overrun, but thank you very much.